All right, welcome everyone. Today we're very lucky to have John Urschel here with us. John Urschel is a mathematician who has perhaps one of the most remarkable trajectories you will ever hear about. John received his bachelor's and master's in mathematics from Penn State, and then went on to become a professional football player for the Baltimore Ravens in 2014. During his second season, John began his graduate studies in mathematics at MIT, alongside his professional football career. John eventually decided to retire from pro football to pursue his real passion, the study of mathematics, and he completed his doctorate in 2021. John is currently a scholar at the Institute for Advanced Study, where he is actively engaged in research on graph theory, numerical analysis, and machine learning. John is the author of Mind and Matter, a New York Times bestseller about his life as an athlete and mathematician, and has been named as one of Forbes 30 under 30 for being an outstanding young scientist. Welcome, John. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. It's such an honor to have you here. Interestingly enough, we both went to MIT, although we missed each other by 10 years. But it's great to connect with another MIT alum who's doing interesting stuff. You definitely have one of the most unique backgrounds that I've ever met, and certainly among people in the world, being both a mathematician and a professional athlete. For those who haven't been familiar with your life and work, maybe can you tell us a little bit about your story, how you came to do both, and if there's any relationship between the sports side and the athletic and the mathematics side, and if there's any synergy between the two.
Yeah. No, that's I get this question a lot, of course. I get a version of this question a lot, and it's somehow it's I think it's a sort of strange coincidence. I happen to really always love like puzzles and math and problem solving, even when I was a little kid. And yeah, especially when I got older, like in high school and to some extent in college, I really took to football because I really just took to the physical contact. Like somehow, I don't know, I was a very like wound up high schooler, I think. Like, the kid who's like, like sitting in their seat and like, shaking. Like I just like wanted to run around and do stuff. And so like football was really good for me. And
Interesting.
yeah, and like somehow I just I happened, well, not happened to, but I worked really hard and I got good at both. And I had the chance to be a professional football player, and now I suppose I can call myself a professional mathematician.
Well, I think anyone who is a member of the IS can call themselves a professional
Yeah, I mean they're
mathematician.
they're paying me money, so I
Yeah.
suppose they're paying me money to do math. So I guess that makes me a professional mathematician, I
Right.
suppose.
I mean, the IS is the NFL of institutions, if I may say so. um,
Yeah, no, IIS is yeah, it's cool. It's not bad.
yeah. Interesting. Just to maybe dive a little deeper,
Mhm.
because how do I say? There are some subjects which people would say are related to math, like music, right? Because
Yeah, of
music
course.
has mathematical patterns. Whereas in your description, it sound at least I would think sports and mathematics are very different in that regard. Mathematics, you're typically still unless you go for a walk, but it's very sedentary usually,
Mhm.
and I can't imagine you thinking about math while playing football because I think that would certainly distract you.
Oh yeah,
So
no, this would get me killed. Yeah,
yeah,
this
yeah.
would be bad.
So it sounds like, would you say that they're more like, you have diverse interests, and math and athleticism fills just two different buckets?
Yeah,
Or is
yeah.
there
I would
actually,
say I would put it in the diverse interests bucket.
I
Like
see.
I wouldn't say there's a lot of like I don't know, people say like synergy. I think
Mm,
there's not a lot of like
mm,
synergy between the two.
I see.
In fact,
Mm,
like the culture is quite different in both in some sense.
right, right. I think that's quite noticeable. Yeah, maybe in that regard, um, maybe just to get let's to fast forward to today, because I guess a lot of the coverage that you've had was when you were a student, and now you're no longer a student as of a year ago. Now that you've been
Mhm.
at the IIS, do you have anything? Do you have any new perspectives on what it's like being a professional mathematician versus being a student with various aspirations, things like that?
Yeah, I'd say ask me in a couple years, because somehow, okay, no, I'm not a student, but I'm at the institute. I get to do math all day. The amount of people bothering me or sort of like bothersome things I have to deal with are pretty minimal. I think the further along you get, what I hear is like when you become a professor, you just have a lot of things to do that aren't math. And you think like, oh, I'm going to become a professor, like I'm just going to do math all day. There's a lot of things other than math that you have to deal with.
Mm,
And so, yeah, I think
interesting.
that's the one thing, but we'll see if that's true.
Yeah, and I guess just to round this out, because I used to be an academic mathematician as well, and I've left for industry. And we were also just talking before our interview about other people in the math community leaving pure mathematics. Now, of course, you've already been in industry, being in the NFL, so you have a mixed career. I was on the typical track that most pure mathematicians have, which is this unbroken chain of undergraduate, graduate, and then academic positions thereafter. But that wasn't the case for you. So you have a very heterogeneous perspective on this. What are your thoughts about industry, academia? How do you see what the
Oh,
relationship between those two are? Or
yeah, I
how did
think
you choose
both.
one or the other? Yeah.
Yeah, I think both are good. I mean, for me personally, I like academia just because I kind of like sort of being my own boss, and especially when football is a very hierarchical sort of like structure. Like you're being told what to do to like the extreme. Like I like the freedom I have, and also I just like that it's a very easygoing type life. Like it's very low stress, low stakes,
Mm, mm,
and it's just it just seems like a pretty pleasant life. But industry also I think has a lot of perks. Like at least the things I hear from my friends. I don't know what your opinion is that there's like you get fulfillment often much quicker. Like you're asked to do something, you work on this, you do something, you sort of have results in some like quick time period, and then you can actually see the thing that you came up with or did actively being used and actively having some like impact on something.
hmm
Whereas
hmm
in academia, you can like work on a math problem for a year and like not have anything to show for it, not even know if you really made any real progress. And it's, it's different, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I can comment on that too. Now being in industry for a while, it's very different. I know somehow being having been in the ivory tower, you can very easily get the sense that, oh, beautiful theorems are the only thing that matter. Everything else is just dirty grudge work. And to some extent, there is a lot of dirty work to be done. Somebody has to do the plumbing, right? Um, but on the other hand, how do I say? Um, at least in say, let's say like in machine learning, right? Because I think pure
Yeah.
mathematicians, they're happy doing things like number theory where they don't really care about application. But I guess for more applied fields like machine learning, it's quite different because the goal isn't to necessarily prove theorems, but to actually get things to work. So then you start having this, actual real need to get things to work. And so if there's a gap between theory and practice, that's very noticeable. Whereas that gap just never comes up in mathematics, because if you're trying to prove things about numbers, it's almost like a perversion to worry about the application. Whereas when you're in an applied field, in some sense, you want theory that does actually work in practice, right? And so it's just a very different game. And so often, but it also opens up more avenues for success because when you get feedback from reality, if something works, that's also a success, even if the theory is lagging, right? Which is very much the
Right.
case for machine learning. So yeah, I would just say, in that sense, there's just a lot more avenues for success. You can get things to work without necessarily proving a theorem. You also get feedback much more quickly because you can iterate on things which sort of work better, even if it's incremental. Whereas if somehow proving a theorem or not proving a theorem can often be, say, a binary thing if it's a very precise
Right.
theorem you're trying to prove. Although, of course, people do end up trying to repackage whatever partial results they have into a weaker form or whatnot. So there's versions
Yeah.
of that too. But yeah. Anyways, yeah, it's just interesting to get these kinds of
Yeah, no,
perspectives.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. There's a different folk. I mean, I know you said that like I do machine learning stuff, but like I should say the extent to which I do machine learning is like proving theorems about very specific models in machine learning that have a nice mathematical structure. Like very much I'm in the former category. Like I prove theorems about things. I like structure. I like nice results. I do like some like, let me put it like this. I either don't care about like application at all, or I at least try to like care about it a little bit. And I do try to be good about that, but in general, I care about like, you know, beauty and structure and elegance.
Sure.
I guess what I mean by like caring a little bit is either like if I'm working on a problem, I think it's good, at least for me. Different people have different approaches, but for me, it's good to either not care at all or like actively care some. And what I mean is like, you know, maybe I'm solving some problem and I don't care at all, in which case, you know, I'm trying to prove some structure and it's a, you know, it's a proof. I don't care if like this is, you know, practically useful for like someone actively doing something on a computer. But if I'm doing something where it's like there's an algorithm or I'm like claiming some like specific runtime or something like this, like if there's a tower function in front, like like it's not useful. Like, you know, sure, okay, maybe it's like you come up with a linear time algorithm, like, you know, of order n, when, you know, n is the number of variables in your input. If there's like a tower function, like with like 100, you know, exponents. Yeah. So I think there's a balance. And so somehow, yeah, but I think it varies from mathematician to mathematician, sort of like where they lie on that spectrum.
I see. Yeah, well, I definitely came from the purist side, so I used to be just all about theory. Anyways, maybe we should just kind of dive into an outline of what we're going to talk about,
Sure.
just for the benefit of our listeners. So this is I guess a tentative outline. We'll see where we go. But I thought we'd first start off. So graph theory is one of the main things that you study. And
yeah.
So,
I mean, I do like matrix analysis. I mean, everything I do is largely like matrix analysis. So matrix theory, linear algebra, and let's apply that to stuff. Whether it's solving like practical problems involving matrices or like analyzing graphs using linear algebra or like looking at specific problems in like machine learning that have some like linear algebraic background. That's generally my toolkit. And so today I think we're largely going to talk about like graph theory and looking at things in graph theory through the lens of like matrix theory or linear algebra, right?
Excellent. Yeah, because I think that's a topic that most people who aren't specialists never get to see, and I think there's quite a lot of beautiful results from here. It's certainly stuff that I never got to learn. So this will be very educational.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff here.
Okay, so let's first off. So let me just like make a list here, and we'll see where we get. But let's see. So I think that one cool thing that I learned about as I was researching this is something called Braess's paradox. I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right, but I think just the story behind it is just fascinating to know. It's quite counterintuitive, so we'll get to there.
Okay, cool. I also did not know. Well, okay, we talked about this a little bit. Like I had heard about this. Like I had heard about this many times. I heard about this when I was a kid, but I had never actually like learned about it, and so I learned about it specifically for this. So that like I did not know anything about the details that we're about to talk about until you like mentioned it to me.
That's okay. You know, sometimes the best way to learn something is to teach it. And so
exactly. I'm not going to pretend like I had this information walking around. I actually have it written down because like, unlike the spectral graph theory stuff, which like I don't need notes. This I need notes for.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. Okay. Hopefully 2 math PhDs can figure this out. Okay. All right. Cool. So then I think the next thing we were going to talk about was, so correct me if it needs adjustment here. So I think we're going to talk about graph connectivity. That's going to take us to the Laplacian. And then that's going to take us to...
I think that's going to take us
Cheeger's constant.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll get there.
I might put Cheeger's constant.
I see. Or inequality, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sure. Okay. All right. And then
I can make changes here too, and then go here, and then we'll do the inequality.
Okay. Awesome.
Cool. You can keep adding. I'm just gonna do.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
We both write at the same time, I imagine.
Yeah. We can write at the same time. Yeah. It's no big deal. Yeah. And then I think we said we were going to talk about spectral bisectioning or clustering.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, maybe I guess clustering might be most relevant for people in machine learning. So we'll see how much time we have for, but we'll see. Okay, so basically there's a part of graph theory called spectral graph theory, which comes out of the Laplacian. And then we're going to see basically an application of that, right? Then we'll talk about, well, I guess the adjacency matrix will already come up. I'll just write it again anyways. We'll define all these terms, but we're just at least putting out. Yeah. We're just putting this all out so people know what they're in for. So we have the adjacency matrix. We have Markov chains from that. I think technical people will be familiar
or in general,
with that.
like anytime you have a finite Markov chain, you can always write it. Like you can always think of it as the random walk associated with some like weighted directed graph. So like in some sense, the way you think about these things are very there's like you can somehow think about like a finite Markov chain just as like a random walk on a directed graph always.
Sure. Yeah. And
which we'll get to.
We'll get to. Yeah. Right. So I think the highlight here, and I just learned about this quite recently, and again, we'll figure this out together. But so one of the big theorems in this subject is what's called the Perron-Frobenius Theorem, and a spectacular application, perhaps the most lucrative algorithm ever, is the PageRank algorithm used by Google for ranking web pages in search. So we'll get to see an application.
That was Bryn and is Bryn someone else?
Bryn and Page. Well, PageRank is a pun on Larry Page's name.
Right. Larry Page. Of course.
Web Page and Larry Page.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And okay, so I think that will be a very nice highlight out of all this. And at the very end, it'd be nice to see basically maybe some maybe recent results, and also maybe some of some of your research. if we have time. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can mention a thing or two.
Okay, cool. So this sounds like a reasonable, maybe ambitious outline, but we'll see how we.
Yeah, no, this looks good to me. Yeah.
All right, so let's start with our first topic, which is Braess's paradox. Yeah. Right, and sort of there's a way to say it kind of informally, which is that opening a highway can increase, let's say, traffic congestion. Or you could also phrase it in the opposite but equivalent way, which is to say that closing a highway will decrease traffic congestion. Okay, so did you want me to keep going? Did you want to start by
is it time for me to start?
Maybe I don't know.
Either
way. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here. Sure. I suppose you're putting me to work. That's okay.
Yeah.
So
okay, awesome.
So I'm just gonna give like the canonical example that I've seen. That's just a simple example of this phenomenon. So suppose, all right, there's you're starting at some place. This is, I'll call it city S over here, and you got to get to city T. Maybe that's too far. T is too far away. I don't like that. I'll put T is here. Okay. And there's two ways you can go. So you can go up here through town X and then to T, or you can go down here through town Y to T. And let's just suppose that the amount of time it takes to go from like X to T and also S to Y is fixed for every driver. So this takes 45 minutes. And I'm not going to put the minutes, we'll just put 45. Okay, so the amount of time takes 45 minutes to traverse both these roads. Like imagine this is a road that's like very wide and like there's lots of lanes and it's a fixed time. No matter how many people are traveling it, you're going to get there in the right amount of time. Okay. But then these other two roads are not so good. Like the more people are on it, the longer it's going to take. And so let's say the amount of time, I realize I use t for the destination and the amount of time. That's okay. Everyone, please just forgive me. I'm going to say t is here equal to the number of drivers on the road, let's say divided by 100. And I'm going to say the same thing for here. And now let's say there's like, I think in this typical example, which I've seen online, I think it's like 4,000 drivers. Okay.
Yeah. So let's call that like D total as opposed to the actual D that's going through the.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah. So now let's talk about this for a second.
Yeah. So actually, the way I think about it is I was trying to think of the analogy. So you can think of, this is sort of like. We could think of these two things as residential areas, because if you think about a residential area, it's sort of like no matter how many cars there are, you just have to keep going through the stop signs. You have to drive at 25 miles an hour. It's constant time, essentially, in this idealization. Whereas on a freeway, also in this idealization, it's sort of the more cars there are, the slower it takes, right? So anyway, so I guess that's the intuition.
Yeah, exactly. And now usually when it's presented, it's like they're adding a highway. I like the taking away idea. So I want to do taking away here. So let's suppose that X and Y are like functionally the same place. Like they are right next to each other, and there is a route from X to Y, a one-way road that is very fast. They're just right next to each other, a one-way road.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so this is like time takes 0. You can pretend the time is 0. It's very small compared to everything else. And now let's just like look at the route and suppose we're a driver going from S to T. How do we want to get there? What route are we going to choose?
Well, so clearly if there's, if I'm the first person starting out in the morning, right? There's nobody else. I just woke up at 5 a.m. People are still waking up. Then of course I want to, let me use a different color here. I'm going to take the top one, and then take this shortcut, which takes no time, and then take this one, right? And then that will take me basically 1 out of 100 plus 0 plus 1 out of 100 for time 2 out of 100, right?
Yep. It'll take you like, you're getting there very quick. It's like
exactly.
Light speed. It's taking like a second. Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
So, but now let's suppose there are 4,000 drivers on the road, because 4,000 are total. So let's just already go to the point where there's 4,000. Which route do you want to take? The point is, even if all 4,000 are on these highway roads, like 4,000 divided by 100 is 40.
That's right.
It's already less than 45.
That's right.
So like no matter how many of these 4,000 drivers are on the road, everyone is going to take this route that you just put in green.
That's right. Exactly. Right.
Everyone.
So, that's right.
How long is that going to take each person?
Right. So in this case, we have, in this case, then, so D will be D total, because everyone's going to take the upper route, and then the total time will be, basically 2D total over 100, and that's going to be 80.
Yep, right? That's right.
Yep.
Now, and this is where the paradox comes in. What if I just like kill this little road in the middle? So, you put a little, like they're doing construction on the road.
Yeah.
Between them.
That's right.
They can't use it. So now.
Yeah. I guess we could just keep that there and just kind of like put an X or something like that.
Yeah, put an X there.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Okay. Yeah.
So now you're going to note that both routes, they're like the same route.
Right.
It looks symmetric in some sense. Like either because anyone who gets on going towards X or gets on going towards Y, they're on it for the long haul because there's no off ramp. So that means both routes, roughly, like if however many people are on the bottom route, the amount of time it's going to take them is going to be the exact same if that same amount of people were on the top route.
Right.
And so we're going to be in equilibrium when the time it takes to go either route is the same. And just by symmetry, to like avoid, rough, complicated math computations, we know because the two routes are just like exactly the same, we know it's going to be split equally in half.
That's
just
right.
by symmetry.
That's right.
So we remove this road, and now 2,000 are going to go the top route, and 2,000 are going to go the bottom route.
That's right.
What's the time going to be then? Well, okay, so let's just say you're someone going on the bottom route. First, it's going to cost 45 minutes for the first part, and then it's going to be 2,000 divided by 100 for the second part, and that's 65. So by getting rid of that road, everyone's commute is now 65 minutes. Whereas when we had that road, everyone's commute was 80 minutes, which is like a really interesting idea.
Yeah. Actually, if you think about it, because I thought about it a bit, not that much, but really this paradox is essentially equivalent in the way that we've seen this problem to the prisoner's dilemma. Have you? It's sort of a well-known phenomenon in social science and economics. Are you familiar with the prisoner's dilemma?
Yeah, I've heard about this. This idea that, like, you get two people in an interrogation room, and like right. you're inclined to sort of tell on each other, and they both tell on each other, and they both go to jail.
Yeah,
for quite some time.
The key point about the prisoner's dilemma is that if everyone acts in their self-interest, which in other words, if you're only trying to optimize for yourself, then the collective outcome will be lower than if there were some forcing mechanism to cooperate, which would allow for a better global outcome. So in this case, let's go back to the situation where the road was open, right? Mm-hmm. The point is that each driver is trying to do the optimal thing for him or herself. Mm-hmm. And in that case, as you said, because there are only 4,000 drivers, every driver will just keep piling on to the top route and then the bottom route, because they're just trying to maximize their own trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. So because no matter what anyone else does, you're always better off taking those routes. Otherwise, you incur a cost of 45. And the point is that because everyone is taking the top and the bottom, they harm everyone else because they're adding to the congestion, right? And then once you add all this local greedy behavior, the global outcome is that everyone has a worse time, because now you have this 80 you see here, right?
Exactly.
Right. And actually, so how do I say? Another way to think about this is that when you like to think about closing the road. Let's just to nail this down. Suppose you started off from this 50-50 situation where you had the 65, right?
Yeah. And problem is, as soon as you open the road,
right? When you open the road,
all the people on the top route are just going to start switching.
Right, and exactly, it's like the prisoner's dilemma, because you're looking out for yourself. Because if when you open up the road, so now let's make it in blue now, right? Yeah. So now you open this up, then again, everyone's trying to look out for themselves. So anyone who's been taking the upper route, right, they're going to say, oh, I can now all of a sudden do this diagonal route. But then everyone starts switching to it. So initially, the person who was sort of free riding, so to speak, they got a little bit better. But then everyone starts free riding, and then it just causes a jam. So it's exactly the prisoner's dilemma. It's like, if I'm only looking out for myself, and then you're only looking out for yourself, then we both end up in a situation where the resulting outcome is worse for either of us. So there needs to be some kind of like cooperating mechanism. In this case,
this would be like music to my wife's ears. This is like it's like an argument for like socialism. Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking about this too, because I didn't think about this that much until I thought about the numbers. But this is like an actual direct argument against just laissez-faire capitalism. Because if everyone's out for themselves, then they will guaranteed to do the suboptimal thing globally. So you need some kind of forcing mechanism, which is either you agree not to take the road or just close the road. That's what socialism is doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, okay, so we could talk about this endlessly, but I thought it was just a cool kind of graph theory problem that it's just a nice way to introduce people to some of the maybe subtle mathematical consequences of just thinking about graphs and relatively simple, arithmetic too.
Yeah. And also, I should mention before we like dig into like the graph theory, there is a version of this for like electrical networks. And there is like a close connection between electrical networks and like spectral graph theory, the stuff we're talking about, because you can sort of write like Kirchhoff's laws in terms of like graphs, And you can think about things like effective resistance in terms of like the graph Laplacian. And so there is like a connection. We're not going to talk about it here because we already have like a pretty long laundry list of things and we're going to be here a while. But if you're like curious about it, you can look up this paradox like as it relates to electrical networks. And if you're curious about like electrical networks as it relates to like spectral graph theory, I would just like there's a good chapter on it in Bollebash's book on graph theory. Also, Dan Spielman has some good notes on this for a more like spectral approach. So
awesome. Yeah.
There are definitely connections here. But,
awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
But, but I think we're gonna like dig into like some questions of connectivity and some questions of like robust connectivity and sort of like looking at like where there are bottlenecks and things. And so like it's all this idea of flows is like gonna really motivate everything we're doing today. I think we're really gonna stay on topic with this idea of like flowing from like one place to another.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. And also, yeah, when we get to Cheeger's constant inequality, it is about these bottlenecks, right? So we're actually
it's this is exactly what it's what it's about.
Awesome. So it's like variations on a theme of bottlenecks, right?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so maybe we'll jump into our second topic then that we outlined.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so maybe you can take it away. So we did talk about that our second subject was connectivity and Laplacian. So yeah, maybe you could.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. So we're gonna move towards graphs, and so first, like I better define for you and like everyone else, like, well, what is a graph? So, well, what's a graph? You should think a graph is like some network of nodes and then pairwise connections between them. And so we can sort of write a graph as a pair. I'm just going to call V and E. And so V is just like a bunch of like nodes or vertices. And E is just a bunch of things we call edges, which are just undirected lines between vertices. And so, like for instance, in this last example, when you looked at all the roots, it looked like this. This would be an example of something called a directed graph, but we're not so fancy today. We're going to keep things simple. So we're just not going to put like orientations on these. And you can think about this picture here, just showing cities that are connected to each other by a road from this previous example. This is a graph. All these dots, these are the nodes or the vertices, and these lines are the edges, okay?
Okay.
And so like everything we're going to do today is going to be related to some sort of graph or network that looks like this. We have a bunch of locations, and then we have like lines between them. Okay. So far, so good. All right, good. And so the first thing, and really what we're going to think about a lot today, is this idea of connectivity and robust connectivity. So for instance, this is a graph here, and this graph is connected because if you pick any two nodes or vertices in this graph, I can always find a path from one to the other. Okay, so like if you pick, well, I'll just pick one for you. You pick this guy and this guy. Well, I can find a root between them. I can just go here, take this top root. But, I actually have a bunch of different roots. I could take this bottom root. I'll put this one in green. I could also take this top root and then the middle root and then the bottom root. And just because I'm really enjoying drawing all these things, make one more in red. I can take this bottom root here, then go up, and then go to the end. So I have like 4 different roots here.
Sure. By the way, so let's just be precise here. So basically an edge is just a pair of vertices, right? So this is an edge.
Yeah. Oh, we're doing real math today.
Yeah. Well, we have an advanced topic, so of course we have to do some real math. But one question that I had was, can there be self edges? Can a vertex occur twice?
Yeah. For today, let's just say no. In general, yeah. I mean, it's sort of kind of up to the user how you want to define it. for today, let's just think that this edge set is just a subset of all. Let me write that. It's just a subset of all pairs, which is usually written like this. So this is just sort of subsets, vertex set, that are of order exactly 2.
Okay, so you will allow self loops.
No self loops here because it has to be a subset.
Oh,
it has to be order 2.
Sorry. Okay, I misunderstood. Yeah. Okay, makes sense. Good. Yeah, because I was thinking, it's going to be cleaner. I suspect without self loops, but okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Makes our lives easier.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Awesome.
And one thing to note from this like little picture I drew is there were like different routes to get from this vertex on the left to the vertex on the right. And it's nice when you have sort of a lot of different paths, because it means you can sort of like avoid congestion. It means that there's sort of like nice connectivity between everything. Everything's well connected. It's not like the connectivity of your network in this graph isn't really relying on a single node. So for instance, suppose we have some network and for some reason, okay, I'm just doing a lot of drawing, so it's just gonna like kind of, it's gonna be what it's gonna be. Suppose this node here just dies.
Which node are okay, yep.
In fact, I'll even erase it. It's gone.
Sure.
We'll see that these 2 red nodes are still connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But now suppose instead I looked at a graph that kind of, I'm not even going to draw the graph, I'm going to draw a shape for you. Mm-hmm. Kind of looks something like this. With like lots of vertices here, lots of vertices here. They're connected in whatever way you want. But there's not many vertices here. The point is, like, this could be a really big graph. If we get rid of maybe just a very few vertices here, we would break the graph in 2 and you wouldn't be able to get from one side to the other.
Right.
So this is what a bottleneck looks like. The idea of removing a very small number of nodes or a very small number of edges, let's say removing a very small number of edges, and now no longer being able to get from like one side to the other. Okay.
Yep. Okay, great. Yep. So this is our concept of a bottleneck, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of situations, you would like to avoid bottlenecks, or at least to be able to recognize them. Or maybe, and sometimes, you have a fixed network. If you have a bottleneck, you want to sort of see where that is, because in some settings, that might not be a bad thing. And in some situations, you might want to recognize it so you can exploit it. Like perhaps suppose, I'm just making up an example. Suppose the nodes represent tasks that have to be done, like things that you have to do, and edges represent tasks that have to communicate with each other, meaning like one task is related to another, they have to communicate during their task. And now you want to like give different people different tasks to do. You want to give people jobs. Well, like the most efficient thing is you want to give each person a job. You want to give each person roughly the same amount of jobs, but you want to minimize the amount of communication they have to do between each other, because it slows them down. They have to wait for someone else to give them something, and it just slows down the whole process. You can think about this like, parallel computing even. You want to minimize communication between processors. If you had 2 people who had to do all these jobs, the natural way to break it into 2 is like around the bottleneck. You just do a break at the bottleneck, and there's very few sort of times that these 2 people will have to communicate with each other. So in that situation, like the bottleneck is useful, and finding the bottleneck is a useful thing for sort of like actually speeding things up, like getting these jobs done.
I see. I guess what's the quantity you're trying to optimize there? Because somehow I thought, how do I say? For example, I think
you were thinking of bottlenecks as bad.
Yeah, because like for example, like the example I had in mind was something like, okay, so maybe we could draw some. So in my example of a bottleneck,
I can kill this picture. This picture is no longer useful for us.
Okay, sure. Yeah. You can erase while I also draw a new thing. But I was thinking like these could be like like cities. And then edges would be, like roads.
Yeah.
And if you want to maximize the economy, you want as many roads between many cities so that resources can flow. And if you have a bottleneck road, then you're gonna have some supply chain issues, which is probably what's going on in the world right now, right? So, right? So
here bottleneck is bad.
Yeah.
You want like an expander, and in a lot of things, bottlenecks are bad. Like when you have some Markov chain, which we'll get to, bottlenecks are bad. But in some circumstances, like for instance, if you want to find structure in something, like bottlenecks show you structure. Like we get to like, partitioning. Like we're going to talk about spectral partitioning. This looks great for spectral bisection because it's like ready made to be broken into two.
Yeah, but I guess I want to say, so it sounds like we didn't write things at the level of what exactly we're optimizing for. We're just kind of speaking intuitively, but sort of.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Okay. Oh, sure. Because maybe we would clarify. Here's what I'm trying to say. In my situation, if I want to maximize the economy, I want to sort of, increase the width, let's say, of bottleneck because I want more resources to flow. What I was trying to get at is that the example you just mentioned, it sounded like you wanted to remove the bottleneck. So that's like a very different thing you're trying to optimize for.
I'm trying to find like bottlenecks in that case. I'm trying to find good ways to break things into pieces.
I see.
So it depends on is your goal. So the question is your goal to increase connectivity or sort of decrease connectivity between pieces? So like in this economy example, you're just trying to globally increase connectivity.
Right.
It's very robust and there are lots of routes from different places to each other.
Right.
Whereas in some instances like this, like parallel computing example or this distribution of jobs, what you really want to do is to be able to break things into pieces where there's not a lot of connectivity between the pieces.
Yeah, I think I see what's different now because in your case, you can think of it as like a dependency problem where like basically what you're saying is that if I'm a person over here and depending on person B over here to complete something to hand off to me, it's going to be very bad if they have to go through a bottleneck. You can think of the analog as like sort of breaking up a large organization into smaller, nimble ones, right? Because that removes some bureaucratic bottlenecks. So I think that would be like that's heuristic intuition. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a reasonable intuition. Yeah.
Yeah. Like basically, if you have an organization where there's a bottleneck of like one supervisor who has to approve everything, that's a bottleneck, right? So you want to get rid of that person so that we can all do our own thing more efficiently. I think that's the analogy. Okay.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah. So let's continue.
But also we haven't we drew pictures, but like we haven't even like defined the idea of like, well, what's a bottleneck?
Sure.
And in some sense, and this is where it gets a little fuzzy, there's like a lot of different definitions of like what a bottleneck is. So the perhaps the most well-known is this thing called the Cheeger's constant in graph theory. And so Cheeger's constant, which is usually represented with an H, so I'll just write H of G, is a really simple quantity. It's just the minimum over all subsets A of the vertex set of what I'll just call delta of A over minimum of A and A complement, which I have not defined these things, so I should do that. So, okay, the A is a subset of our vertex set. So A is some group of vertices. The order of A is pretty like straightforward. That's just the number of elements in it. This delta of A is not so straightforward. And this delta of A is just defined to be all the edges, E, such that, here, I should probably write it like edges pairs IJ, where I is in A and J is not. So sort of edges going between, and I can draw a picture. I'm just going to write it differently. So
okay.
Even a little more intuitive. I'm going to make A so that it's at most half the size of the graph.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it's just to make our life easier, and I'll just redefine this delta. And so these are just pairs such that one is in A and the other one is not. Okay, and so I can draw a picture. We have some graph G. I'll use different colors because why not? We can say this part is A, and then all the edges going between, this is delta of A, and then this part over here, this side we'll just call a complement. Okay. And so this h of g, which is called Cheeger's constant,
I see.
Is a way of, go ahead. What's up?
Yeah, I was going to say, it basically looks like it's like a flux, basically, right? Because the top term is how much stuff is flowing, and then you normalize by how much stuff there is, right? So it's like the rate of flow per stuff. So the more stuff there is, the less the rate is, because if the conductivity is fixed but you have more stuff, it's like a lower rate of flow. So it's basically a flux.
Yeah. I mean, this normalization is important because otherwise, like, you don't have a lot of like flow between one side to the other. But if there's not much on one side, then like in some sense you need to normalize this, like this sort of flow. And so this is the sort of thing that if this quantity is quite large, then you have a very robust, well-connected network.
So in this case, with the bottleneck, indeed, it's quite small, right? Because what you have is you have all.
So for instance, like if you think about it from.
If you have like just one edge connecting there, then it's 1 over the size of whichever one of these clusters is you're minimizing it. I guess largest.
Suppose they're the same size, then it's like
exactly
exactly 2 over n. And if you imagine a much better thing, maybe you imagine something where, let's say, the graph is completely connected. So there's an edge between every pair of vertices. Well, then I think this should just be like 1, right?
Let's see. Let's look at this. So for this
case, it shouldn't be 1. It should be like order n. So this case, it's n over 2, n over 2.
So this would be 2 over n, which is very small.
Very small. Yeah. In the example where everything's connected, you're going to see that it's like of order n.
Yeah. So let's say a complete graph, which means that you have n vertices and n choose 2 edges. Right. So then here, if you have a let's call the size of a m, right? And if you have m things, then you have. You
can just call it n choose 2. I mean, you can just call it n over 2.
N over 2. Right? Yeah. Oh, I see.
Yeah, you're gonna want to break it right in half.
Oh, I see. But let's just double check that. So for n, we're gonna let's do the extreme. So if the size of our set is m, then we're gonna have m, and then the things that are connected will be n minus m times m, right? Right. Because so what in this picture, right? You have
exactly.
You have m things. You have n minus m things, and they're all, since everything is connected to everything, then there are exactly n minus m times m vertices. And now you want to take the minimum over m, right?
Yes.
So you can it's a little crowded here. So we're going to take the minimum over m of this thing. Well, the m's cancel out. And since we're minimizing over m less than or equal to n over 2, indeed, as you said, we want to take m as large as possible. So then this is indeed n over 2. Let's say n is even. Let's say if n is even. Yeah. Okay. So great. And this is now, the point is that this is large.
This is very large. This other example is very small.
Yeah. Okay. So just to recap, we computed the Cheeger constant for G, sort of for G bottleneck, and this is the Cheeger constant for G complete.
Yeah.
Awesome. And they're diametrically opposite phenomenon.
Exactly. One is showing, yes, we have something that's very well connected, very sort of robust to, let's say, things being removed, and the other one is very, very brittle.
Right.
The idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah, so this is the picture we should have in mind. And I should mention, and we are gonna, well, we'll see how much we dig into this, but I should mention that the Cheeger constant is like one example of a measure of this. There's a bunch of different types of measures that are all a little different and all scale a little differently. So sometimes I need to like remember my scaling, but yeah. So
I see. So this is like the vanilla Cheeger constant, and there's like little.
This is like one Cheeger. So there's this. It's called the Cheeger's constant. There's something called the conductance, which is more typical, which is more typically seen in spectrograph theory for one reason or another, which I can define later if we're gonna like show something. If we're gonna show a proof, that's the thing to define. But all the differences really show up in the following way. Like here we're normalizing by the number of vertices in A. Sometimes it makes sense to normalize by the number of, let's say, normalized by the degree of each vertex in A, rather than normalizing by A, which when you have a graph where all the degrees are the same, this is the same up to a constant. Yeah. So for instance, in this, so that's the idea.
Sense. I see. Okay, great. But it's all variations on the same.
Yeah, it's all variations on the same idea. It's just little nuances.
Right.
Yeah, there's little nuances and little differences as in every field, but this is the right idea.
Right. It basically all of the. It sounds like if I'm interpreting.
Yeah, it's always some measure of edges going between versus some measure of like size within.
Exactly. Yeah. So
this is the uniform. Yeah. This is like the unifying theme, but like if whoever's watching encounters these types of things in the wild, there are lots of different sort of specific ways in which it can show up in lots of different names, like Cheeger constant, conductance, normalized cut, ratio cut. There's like a lot of different like variations.
Awesome. Yeah.
So
great.
Which is something to keep in mind. But in general, this is the right theme. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So I guess maybe what's next might be, or I don't know what you had next, but is there an application of this?
We should mention that in general, this can be really difficult to compute exactly.
Yep.
This is not like intuitively, you look at this and it's just like, why should I be able to compute this easily? Because we're taking a minimum over all subsets.
Right.
There's a lot of subsets.
Right.
And so, would we be able to actually find this minimum quickly? Probably not.
Yeah. What do we know what the complexity class is of this?
So I'm assuming it's NP-hard. I know that in general, this type of thing is NP-hard. And I think this exact one should be NP-hard. I know variants of it are exactly NP-hard, but this one, off the top of my head, I couldn't like refer you to a specific hardness proof, but I'm sure this is hard.
Yeah. Let's just to make sure I understand. So the problem is we don't know the size of the subset. If we knew the size of the subset we were looking for, you would just do, let's say the size was M. You would just look at all possible M size subset, and that's polynomial. But
no.
Right?
No. So that's not necessarily polynomial.
Sorry, would you just? Oh wait.
Right, that's could be really large. Like make M n over 2, and that's a lot of things to look over.
Oh, sorry. For fixed M, it would be, but you don't know what the size of M is relative to the size of the graph. I see. Yeah, I was going to say what I was trying to say is that all possible subsets is 2 to the size of the graph, which is therefore exponential. But if you fixed the size M, if I told you in advance what the M was going to be, then it would just be, O of G to the M. The problem is that M could also depend on the size
exactly.
of the graph. Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah. Like in both these examples, M was n over 2.
Exactly. Okay.
So I think, because I know even this question of a version of this question, like the bisection problem is NP hard. Like if you take a graph and you suppose it's a graph with an even number of vertices, and you just ask like a more structured version of this question, what bisection into equal size parts minimizes the number of edges that go between? This is hard. Yeah. So here you're fixing the size of saying, now I'm fixing A to be of size n over 2. And now minimize here, that's hard.
Okay. 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 So
Whereas like if you just note that without this denominator normalization, this is an easy problem. Like just finding the cut that minimizes, like the cut with the minimum number of edges going between. I think this is just easy.
Oh, I see. Because yeah, if you don't normalize things, you could probably do some kind of dynamic programming approach where you kind of
I mean, also there's this like structural thing that is, I think it's like submodular then.
I see.
But you wouldn't use like you can probably do some dynamic programming.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is a hard constant compute. That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is like, well, how do we try to get a good sense of this? And it turns out that by looking at some sort of algebraic properties of a matrix representation of the graph, we can get a pretty good idea of what's going on. Okay, so maybe it's time to do a new slide and we'll talk about something called the Laplacian.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, let's do that. Okay.
Okay, so what's going on? We have a graph, G, and I'm going to define a matrix L n to number of elements of V, and this Laplacian is an n by n matrix with the following entries. So on the diagonal, this is equal to the degree of vertex I. So that's the number of edges connected to vertex I. And on the off diagonals, this is going to equal -1 if there's an edge between I and J. And it's going to equal 0 otherwise. Okay. So this is just sort of a matrix entry-wise definition. It doesn't really give you any good intuition. And so the way I like to think about sort of like how this Laplacian behaves is I like to think about this a little bit in terms of like calculus.
By the way, so if there's more than one edge, is it the sum?
Yeah, so here we're just dealing with like an undirected graph. So we're not dealing with like multiple edges between
Oh, I see.
Vertices.
Okay. So
yeah, we're keeping it very vanilla today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah, maybe let's just do a quick. So like if we had let's go back to that graph that we had, right? With
we've been playing with this graph all day. Oh
yeah, let's do it. Let's write the matrix for this out, right?
Yeah, so we have this one right here, and I'll number it 1, 2, 3, and 4. And here, what is L equal? Well, vertex 1 is connected to 2 vertices, 2 and 3, so it has degree 2. Vertex 2 is connected to 3 vertices, it has degree 3. Same for vertex 3, and vertex 4 is connected to 2 vertices. Okay? Now 1 is connected to 2, so I'm going to put a -1 here. 1 is connected to 3, so I'll put -1s here. And 1 is not connected to 4, so I'll put 0s here. And then I'll just like keep filling it in. And I'm just putting -1s everywhere else because all other pairs are connected other than 1 and 4.
Yep.
Great. So this is the Laplacian of this graph. And you might be thinking, well, why is it even called a Laplacian? Well, if you think about the Laplacian from like calculus, you have some like you have some function, you take the gradient of it, and then you take the divergence. This is how we like think of a Laplacian. Well, it's actually a very similar thing here. And the idea is that you can actually write the Laplacian based off this idea of gradient and divergence. So suppose you have some function on the vertices, meaning you have a value for each vertex, which is equivalent to thinking we have like a vector of length n. And let's try to think about like what does L applied to x, some vector x, look like maybe for vertex I. So just from the definition, we know that it's the degree of vertex I times its value at xi minus the sum over all vertices adjacent to it of xj. And so now I can just distribute this degree. This is just the sum over all edges adjacent to it of xi minus xj. And the way you can think about this is this xi minus xj is a gradient along the edge, right? It's a difference. The sum is like the divergence. We're summing up the gradient along all the edges of that vertex. And so that's how you can think about this as like a divergence gradient type idea. And this is how you can kind of think this matrix Laplacian is related to the Laplacian we know from, calculus.
Right. Another, just to add to that, so I think this is also useful to have in mind. So I'll just write this in blue. So if you just look at, say, if you discretize the real line, right? And now let me just say focus on this vertex, right? So so the Laplacian written, if you're doing calculus, one way to write the Laplacian in dimension, well, okay, the Laplacian in dimension D, so in RD, people will write this, and they'll just look at the sum of all the derivatives. See how should my notation be? So I guess I'll just do it like this, or maybe let's call it n. Okay. Or actually, if n is the number of, okay, actually n is the dimension. Okay, let's call it d then. Okay, because n was the number of vertices. Right. I don't want to confuse that. It's just a lot of d's. It's getting maybe a little confusing. Yeah. Although I should say, in calculus, one this is called the Analyst Laplacian if it doesn't have a minus sign, but the Geometer's Laplacian, which is actually the Laplacian we're using now, is what's called a positive operator. So there's actually an overall minus sign, which we can return to later. But okay, so there's an issue with minus signs. But the convention we're using is
the pesky minus sign.
That's right. But if we focus on d equals 1, then we're in one dimension. You can think of a second derivative as a forward difference minus a backwards difference.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, this is like, in some sense, this is the way a lot of sort of things in differential equations are solved. You take some, some derivative and you're approximating it with some finite difference.
Exactly.
And, you can sort of bound the error in that using Taylor's theorem. And this underpins a lot of stuff. I should say that my master's thesis was actually on multi-grid methods. And so this was actually part of my background.
Nice.
Kind of this is how I started getting into these things, is through numerical solutions.
Oh, I see.
PDEs,
I see.
Although I've long since left my where I started from, but so this, exactly.
Awesome.
But go ahead. Yeah, you can feel free to write it out.
Yeah, let me just finish up this thought, just so we don't.
It's good to show.
Yeah. So basically, the forward difference would be. Let me use it. Right. The forward difference would be to look at J would be you'd look at the right minus the left, right, and then you would subtract the left, the backwards difference between this, right. So then
times H or whatever you want to do, and then you subtract.
Exactly. But if the unit is 1, right, then we could just ignore that essentially. Yeah.
Or maybe you want a 2 in here. Yeah, this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think. Okay. Yeah, I was just going to normalize everything. If we're on a unit lattice.
Okay. If we have a unit, then we'll just normalize this, and then what you get is here. I accidentally erased that. Is and I put parentheses here. Yeah, you get xj plus 1 minus 2xj plus xj minus 1, which is actually just a row of the negative of the graph.
Exactly, right? Because this 2 right here is the degree, and then you get the connectivity here. And again, the Laplacian will have a minus sign because I looked at the ordinary second derivative operator. You put a minus sign, and then you'll flip the signs here to get the correct, the 2 minus 1 row in this Laplacian matrix. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can see the Laplacian also from this discretized calculus perspective, essentially. And the graph is, for a general graph, is just a more general version of that, where you're not, say, in just a line. situation. Yeah. Actually, I have a question.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think this must be the case, but one question I had for you is, I'm guessing the Laplacian, the graph Laplacian was indeed inspired by the real analysis, right? Was there any
that's
other
a
reason
great question. I assume so. I don't even know who, I don't even know where this first showed up, but I can only assume.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I assume so.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, yeah.
I mean, in fact, there's there's a lot of results around sort of if you have some Laplacian on some manifold or something, and you look at graph Laplacians and you take some limit, there is actually some convergence there. Not for the normalized Laplacian, there's some results there. So there really is a real connection there.
I see. Yeah, actually, here's my guess, right? Because of course, real analysis is older than graph theory in terms of being a mature mathematical area of research. So then there was the real analysis Laplacian, then the graph theory Laplacian, and then I guess even more cutting edge is how one can take the limit of graphs to recover, say, continuous objects, which is I think what you alluded to. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's sophisticated stuff. Maybe another comment along this line. I think Cheeger is a differential geometer. So
he's at Carron. Really nice guy.
Yeah. So because if you look up Cheeger's constant inequality, you'll see a differential geometers version. So I guess people from graph theory.
That's the original version.
Right. So I guess he doesn't work in graph theory. Other people imported his ideas and attributed to him by analogy. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's about right.
I see. Okay, just to get the story right there. Okay, great. Okay, so we've motivated the Laplacian. We've seen some examples. Okay, so what's
so
next?
Now let's relate the Laplacian back to this Cheeger constant.
Great.
L is symmetric. That we know.
Yep.
And in fact, it's symmetric, semi-positive definite. All of its eigenvalues are non-negative.
Yeah, and just to note, that's why we gave the sign convention that it is with that extra minus sign. Yeah. So exactly. Yes, symmetric and and positive.
Yeah, positive semi-definite. Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
And the reason why I say positive semi-definite is that the Laplacian times the all ones vector is just 0.
That's right.
Think about that the
constant function.
The second differences, you take the derivative of a constant function, you're going to get
exactly. Yep.
Is what you would expect.
Yep.
So because it's symmetric, its eigenvalues are real. So the smallest eigenvalue has to be 0 because, we just gave you an eigenvector of all ones. And then we'll just write the eigenvalues from smallest to largest. And the whole idea of Cheeger's inequality is that this second eigenvalue actually gives you a really good approximation of Cheeger's constant. And the inequality is that 2 times Cheeger's constant, I believe, is greater than or equal to lambda 2. And I think this is at most, do I have a 2 here? Then where's my 2 here? Okay, I think I want this. Is at most Cheeger's constant squared divided by 2 times the maximum degree of the graph.
Oh, that's funny. So is that a what people would normally write as the Laplacian?
Yeah, usually in graph theory we use this delta of G to be the maximum degree.
Okay.
Yeah, which is funny, but yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because that's usually the Laplacian symbol. But okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So this is great because basically
this is Cheeger's inequality, and the idea here. So just to let us parse this.
Yeah.
The idea of what this is saying is we are trying to figure out, is there a bottleneck? What is this best cut in terms of minimizing the number of edges that go between 2 parts? And this result is saying that if we look at the second smallest eigenvalue of the Laplacian, we're going to get a lower bound on this cut, and we're going to get an upper bound on the square of this cut. So this is going to really, tell us some information about, is there a really small cut?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really, I should say, mathematicians always get excited when you have two different worlds get fused together in some kind of surprising relationship. And this is surprising, right? Because
Yeah.
the h of g, the Cheeger constant, this is just pure graph theory combinatorics.
Yeah, pure combinatorics.
Right.
And in between, we have some very nice
linear algebra, right? Linear algebra analysis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is linear algebra analysis, and they're now beautifully brought together. So this, so for I know the barrier to entry here is a bit higher than most people are familiar with, but conditioned on that, this is definitely a beautiful result.
Yeah,
right?
very beautiful result.
Yeah,
it's a it's really nice. And yeah, it's one of these things where we're taking something that's very difficult to compute exactly, and we're getting a reasonable approximation to it very quickly, because you can compute eigenvalues quite easily.
Yeah, I was going to say because the complexity of these eigenvalues, because you have an n by n matrix, right? So n was the size of G. Now we had something that was operate exponentially hard, or exponential compute, exponential complexity in n, right? Because you have to look at all subsets. But to compute the eigenvalues of an n by n matrix, that's just O of n cubed, polynomial.
Well,
right?
I mean, just computing this one, this is like it's like kind of linear time.
Oh yeah. Oh right, because you could just do power iteration.
You only need one. Yeah, you can do power or like Landshos. And so to get that up to like some error is the dependence on the error varies from method to method, but the idea is like you can get a pretty good approximation of that just doing some constant number of applications of your matrix, however much that costs. So when I say linear, I mean like in the number of edges.
Linear in the number of edges.
Like your cost, right?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Just like what's power iteration, but like you have a vertex. I mean, you have the vector. You're just applying your matrix again and again, and like the real cost is like, well, how many non-zero entries of your matrix do you have?
That's right. Okay, so for a dense matrix, that would be n squared essentially.
Yeah, because if you have a dense graph, exactly. That's like n squared.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So you imagine like to just think about it for power iteration to make our life simple. If you have a dense graph, that's n squared each step you do. And then, let's suppose you do, less than order n steps. You're still going to get a good approximation.
Yep.
And it's not going to cost as much as if you did like QR or something.
Sure. So just to wrap this up, so sort of HG was sort of exponential complexity in n, whereas lambda 2, for a good approximation, it's basically O of the size of the edge set, which is, rough.
With maybe some like epsilon hiding.
Yeah.
Where the epsilon is like how well we want to approximate
it.
But
certainly it's going to be upper bounded, what I was going to say, upper bounded by n cubed, because you could just diagonalize the matrix. Yeah. But in particular, it's polynomial with the low degree.
Yeah, even if you do an eigen decomposition of the whole matrix, it's still polynomial.
Exactly. That was I was being very just
in fact there. I mean there's some in fact it's you can do even better than n cubed to get all the eigenvalues. You can do it in like matrix multiplication time, I think. Although who would do this?
Yeah. Okay. I was just doing the most naive linear algebra.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. But so this is not only is it a beautiful result, but it's also the computational complexity is now it's tractable. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And the result itself is quite nice. So if you look for proofs, you'll see there are proofs of lots of different versions. So this is just one version I showed you. Some versions are easier to prove than others, but if you go to any like spectral graph theory textbook or algebraic graph theory textbook, you will see a proof of this. And no matter what version you see, it's going to roughly look like this. Like for instance, if you use conductance and normalized Laplacian, it'll look a little different. Like it'll look like, I think it looks like, is this right?
See, so since there are I see different versions of this, different.
Yeah, there's
instead of Cheeger's.
Like,
I see.
So I think it's like this.
I see. So there are other versions of Cheeger-like constants where
Yeah,
you
so
have
this is a different one where mu2, this is second smallest of the normalized Laplacian, which you can think is just like the Rayleigh quotient, y transpose L y, where here we're normalizing by degree. And then
interesting.
Again, for this one, now this minimum is going to be delta of A over now the sum of the degrees where these are of in A.
I see. And I see. So
so this is, for instance, a different version. This is the version you'll see more often in spectral graph theory books. But yeah, you can see how they're very similar in spirit. And there's lots of different versions of this, I should say.
Okay. So there's maybe two questions. Are these inequalities tight? In other words, can you find graphs in which you have equalities?
Yeah,
on either
both
side?
are tight. And I can even tell you that this bound. So I wrote the bottom one different than the top. You can see how I changed that. I can rewrite that, but this inequality here is quite easy to prove. I'm not sure if it's the easiest for this one, but definitely down here. Oh, no. Now I realize what I did wrong. Why am I doing that? Sorry. It should be like this. That wouldn't make sense before. Okay, good.
Okay.
Good. This inequality here and this inequality here, these are pretty straightforward. Like the way you prove them is you can write these minimization problems where you're looking over all subsets. You can sort of think about this as a type of linear algebra problem where you're fixing each entry to be one thing or the other. So where it's like some integer type situation. And if you just relax away from sort of this integer sort of condition, then you get a linear algebra problem because you're it's like minimizing some Rayleigh quotient where you sort of remove this restriction. And so that's how you get these one-sided of these.
A Rayleigh, just to make sure. So this ratio of quadratic forms is what you're calling a Rayleigh quotient. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so one side is quite easy, and like it takes, I would have to define a thing or two, but it would really only take like 3 or 4 minutes to prove. Whereas the other side actually takes some work, and like I think in most classes, like you'll spend a lecture on that, or like half a lecture.
Okay, I see.
So so this side is easy. This side takes work. So analogously here, this side is easy and this side takes work.
I see. Can you just maybe say a few words about the difficult side? What do you have to do there?
Yeah, you have to. It's not horrible, but you have to do some things. Like you have to it's typically broken up into proving like a number of like multiple steps, and like it's involved. Like it's the sort of thing where it's going to take multiple pages.
I see. But like what conceptually, what do you
so conceptually, what's the idea? The idea is that what you really want to show is as follows. So what are we conceptually doing? Well, you can think that I'll write this one right here. Okay. The idea is you want to show the following thing. If you have some cut that has some, small value, then ideally you want to show that you can build some eigenvalue. Like you want to show that if you have some cut with some small value, then somehow all eigenvalues all sort of like vectors that you possibly build have to have at least some large value. Otherwise, you're going to run into some issue. It's kind of the intuitive idea.
Okay. Is this
like the way to think about it? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Well, I think this might be related to what I was gonna squeeze in after you've explanation.
What were you going to say?
Because I thought this was such a beautiful way of thinking about it. Because I was also curious when I saw this, like why, like how do I say, a lot, just as a general word of wisdom, when you see a complicated result in mathematics, oftentimes before you jump into the details, you kind of want to know why is something true, right? Because when you look at this for the first time, you have like no idea, like why should this even be true, right?
Yeah.
And as I was researching this a bit, I think I was kind of Wikipedia browsing. I forget where I got the link. But you can think about the relationship between bottlenecks and this lowest positive eigenvalue in terms of harmonic oscillators. Is this the way? Do you know what I'm talking about, or should I just kind of explain?
No, explain.
Oh, it's beautiful. I think based on what you were about to say, I think it's very much related to what you said. So let's look at the bottleneck. Okay, so so we have this situation, and here's the thing, right? So we know that the so hg here is small. And we expect, therefore, lambda 2 should also be small because these things are comparable, right? So the real question is why should both of these be small in this graph, right? So kind of the question, why? Okay, so we already know that this is small based on just the definition, but why should lambda 2 be small? So here's like the physics reason for it. And I thought this was so cool.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm ready for
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, let's rewrite the Laplacian in terms of its associated quadratic form. So in other words, the Laplacian. So we wrote this thing. So if you apply the Laplacian to, right? So we have this v is just a vector whose variables are all the vertices, right? And then this guy will be basically vi minus vj squared, where I and j are connected, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Now, have you taken physics?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is.
Are you talking about when you say harmonic? So the term harmonic. Are you talking about spring systems?
Yeah, exactly, spring systems.
Oh yeah. No, this I know well.
Oh, okay, yeah. But basically, what you think about this is just the you have a spring or harmonic oscillator. Joining Vi to Vj, right? Because in one of the first things you learn in physics, right, is like if you have a spring and you have an object here, then the potential energy, the potential energy is basically proportional to the displacement squared, right? So if I have two vertices, Vi and Vj, which are connected on my graph, I can think of this as actually being a spring connecting the two, and then the potential energy I get is precisely this term here, because I have a spring for any two vertices that are connected, right? So you got to think of
this is like for this sort of approach or this sort of idea, like a great thing to look at is Tutt spring embedding theorem. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Yeah. So this like takes this idea and suppose you sort of kind of runs with it. Suppose you want to draw a graph in the plane. And let's suppose it's like a planar graph, and it's what we call three connected. So it means you have to remove at least three vertices to disconnect the graph. Tutt proved this really cool thing that all you have to do is you sort of pick one face of the graph, like sort of like take these like vertices, which you can think of as like little rings, and sort of like nail them into the ground. And as long as where you nail them into the ground is like convex, you just like let all the other ones reach equilibrium. Okay. And that's a planar embedding of a planar graph. And not only that, like just by sort of like, well, just by the fact that that's planar, you also note that embedding minimizes like your energy conditional on the location of like where you put the boundary. So the idea is we have some graph, maybe it looks like something like this. So it's a planar graph. It's three connected. So let me make this three connected. Okay, so that's a planar graph. It's three connected. You have to remove three vertices to disconnect the graph. Removing any two does not do the trick.
Okay.
And now what this theorem says is, suppose I now fix the location of a face of the graph, and I make sure it's convex. So suppose I actually just fix all these vertices on the outside, on the outer face, to be exactly where I drew them. Now, what I'm going to do is, we can think of it again as a spring system.
Mhm.
And now I'm just going to let each interior vertex just be at its equilibrium.
Okay.
Which is just equivalent to saying, which is an equivalent way of thinking of this as like the harmonic extension of this boundary. I'm making sure each vertex is at the sort of average of its neighbors. Right? Because you want to minimize, you're looking at, let's say,
blue is, what's the difference between blue and white?
Blue is fixed.
Okay.
So I fixed a boundary. This is like the boundary of it. This is a face of the graph.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And now these, let's say, green vertices here.
I see.
I let sort of just do whatever they want.
I see. Okay.
And the cool thing is that when I do this, this graph is 3 connected. I embedded the boundary so that it's convex.
Oh, this is beautiful. I see.
This is going to be a planar embedding of my planar graph.
It makes sense because if there's any twisting, it's going to increase the energy, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's going to be, So this is a beautiful result.
Beautiful.
It's telling you like this is going to be planar, and also you should note that this is like indeed like the harmonic extension. The idea is we're fixing the boundary and we're trying to minimize the energy as much as we can, conditional on this boundary being fixed.
Very cool.
And just by like looking at the Laplacian, like the way you do that is just by making sure at every vertex, it's at the sort of like mass center of its neighbors. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
So that's a really, really nice result due to time.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very cute. Yeah. So I finished on this harmonic oscillator thing. I didn't explain the connection back to, okay, let's get back to the lambda 2, right?
So the lambda 2, so what were we talking about? We were talking about this lambda 2, and we were talking about intuition for the tough side, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So actually,
so the one side is very intuitive. You think of it like you think of it almost like you have like a integer programming type problem, and you're relaxing it. And this is kind of the way that you show the one side, which is really intuitive. The other side is like, it's more complicated and a little like less intuitive. Like, so one key thing you have to do is you take this vector corresponding to your mu2, and you need to like show nice properties of it. And like one key property that is like a key ingredient in this proof is showing that there's like so you have this eigenvector associated to this like second smallest eigenvalue, and you need to show that there exists like some subset of it where like it has large Rayleigh quotient. You can sort of, the key is that like, how should I put this?
Is this related to the eigenvector essentially being constant on these two clusters and having a kind of a jump at the bottleneck?
Yeah, I mean, it's intuitively like that.
Okay. Okay, and and here's what I was going to say. So let's go. Okay, so this isn't so much proving the bound as it is showing that there's a relationship between the Cheeger constant and lambda 2, namely why with the bottleneck graph are they both small? So that should be convincing as to why they're comparable, right? In this limit,
that's incredibly.
Right? Yeah. So what I want to say is this. So in this. So think of this graph, as we said, like there's a bunch of springs. And so we have like, let's just say for simplicity, just one spring joining these two clusters, right? And then you ask yourself, how does this thing oscillate? Now, before I get back to this, let's think about this for a second. So suppose each side were complete, okay, just for simplicity. Just that's what it means for these to be very large clusters, right? Now, if you think about it, a complete graph will oscillate at a very high frequency, right? Like you can imagine like okay, so like if I have a complete graph on 2 vertices, it just kind of goes back and forth. If I have a complete graph on 3 vertices, then like this thing kind of like I don't know if people can see my hand, but it's like this triangle. It's just like contracting in and out all 3 vertices at the same frequency, and then it even gets just more dramatic if you have a square where like this square now has all 4 vertices just contracting in and out, back and forth, and it just basically the lowest non-zero eigenvalue increases with the number of vertices. So it's basically, if you think about it, if you have a lot of springs, there's just a lot of energy while all of them are vibrating.
Right, it's trying to like pull things. It's trying to pull things in, and you need some normalization to send things out. I mean, we're like kind of moving all over the place, but this is also very related to graph drawing And I know we're getting to spectral bisection at some point. Maybe, I don't know. We've been talking for a while. I don't know how far we're actually going to get down our list.
Yeah, we'll see. But
we'll see. But yeah, like in graph drawing, like one really natural thing to do is suppose you want to draw a graph in the plane, planar or not, whatever. A natural thing to do is you just draw it using the eigenvectors corresponding to the second smallest and third smallest eigenvalues.
Okay.
And you can think this is like thinking about this sort of spring type idea. You're trying to minimize this energy conditional on, you need something to like make sure it doesn't like collapse on itself. And one natural way to condition on that is to say, hey, let's make sure that the like L2 norm of like the locations of these things are normalized to 1. So that stops it from like from degenerating to a point. Because you're forcing something. And then the other thing you can do, well, if you just enforce that, like, if you have springs, it's going to like collapse onto a line. So you have to like do something to stop that. And the thing you stop from doing that is maybe you enforce some orthogonality between like in one direction or the other. And as soon as you impose those two things, the eigenvectors corresponding to lambda2 and lambda3 become the minimizer.
Okay.
And if you use them for drawings, it makes these beautiful, beautiful pictures. Yeah.
Interesting. Sorry.
So this is a specific example of something called diffusion mapping. And the energy that's minimizing, I think, is historically called something called Hall's energy. Yeah. And so like, for instance, in like spectral clustering, which we were going to talk about, like, I don't know who first came up with this idea. I mean, there's this famous paper of Ng-Jordan-Weiss. I don't know if they were first or who came up with the idea, but the idea is just you have some data, you build a weighted graph from your data, however you do it, based off maybe you put edges between things if they're within a certain distance of each other. And if they're too far away, you just don't put an edge, or you weight the edge. There's different ways to do this, but you get a graph, you compute the Laplacian, you embed the graph in a very low dimension just by drawing it using its smallest, using the eigenvectors corresponding to, let's say, the smallest k eigenvalues. And then you run like k-means clustering or something. But like that intermediate step is just drawing a graph. And it's drawing a graph, and it's sort of like the spring picture you made. It's kind of like, yeah, you have a graph, you have these springs trying to bring things in, and the normalization of like, setting like L2 norm to be 1, and normalizing some orthogonality in different directions. This actually is exactly like, this mapping is the exact minimizer of that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So there's lots of really interesting connections here. Yeah. So it's quite nice. And also, like, when you're talking about breaking a graph into two pieces, because of these connections between like the isoperimetric constant and this second smallest eigenvalue, which is called the algebraic connectivity. Oftentimes there's a lot of like heuristics where you want to break a graph into two pieces. You just use that eigenvector, and then you just cut somewhere.
I see.
And you cut based off the value of the eigenvector at each vertex. Yeah.
Awesome. So actually, so let me just finish up this thought. So here, what I was trying to illustrate is that if you have a large cluster of harmonic oscillators, right, say a complete graph, and you just look at this part in isolation, it has a very lowest eigenvalue. Actually, for a complete graph, all the non-negative eigenvalues are the same, and I think proportional to n, if I'm not mistaken. The point is that when you insert this, you can think
they're
of
all
the graph,
n minus 1. Is that right?
Yeah, something. Oh, right, exactly. Yeah, because basically for a complete graph, you'd have like n minus 1 minus 1 everywhere else, right? And so
no, they should all be n. They're all n. Is that right? Yeah, that should be right. They're all n.
Let's see. Yeah, they're all n, right? Because your eigenvalues are all these like 1 minus 1 eigenvectors. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is this: you can think of so you have this barbell, right? Each of the two ends could vibrate very violently on their own because they're so tightly wound. But you put this little connection, and now the barbell has this very slow mode where it just kind of contracts slowly in this direction, and these two are more or less stationary, right? And so you could think of that as being this lambda 2, because you originally had these two things. If you look at the Laplacian separately on the two parts, their spectrum looks like 0 and a bunch of n's. So very large eigenvalues, all the same. You put this little shortcut, and now the Laplacian on this bottleneck graph, you've basically spliced in what was the eigenvalue of this two vertex system. You basically perturbed like.
It's just a tiny perturbation. Before you had you had sort of these two eigenvalues that were both 0, one corresponding to the left, one corresponding to the right. Yeah. And when you bring these things together, this second smallest is just a perturbation of 0.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's the sense in which, right, lambda 2. So how do I say? So to finish up this thought, hg small means there's a small bottleneck. A small bottleneck means you're perturbing a 0 eigen. That's probably was the better way to say it. I didn't even need to bring in oscillators. You're perturbing a small 0 eigenvalue, because if you have a disconnected graph, right, you have if you have a connected graph, you still have the constant function is your 0 eigenvalue. If you have a disconnected graph, you actually have two 0 modes, because you have the one where it's constant on both components, and then another one where you have a two-dimensional space of 0 modes, because you have two components, right? And the point is that when you join the two components, then you can perturb one of those eigendirections into a small but non-negative eigenvector, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, but pictorially, okay, for people who didn't get that, the point is that if you want to think about eigenvalues in terms of oscillations, the point is that if you looked at the individual ends of the barbell separately, they'd oscillate very violently, because you have all these springs tightly wound and all connected. They just oscillate like crazy. As soon as you have this little bottleneck, now you have a situation where the barbell can oscillate very slowly, because the two ends basically don't do much, while this thing kind of slowly kind of oscillates. And that's sort of the physics picture for why lambda 2 can be small. Yeah. Anyways, I thought that was really cool. So,
that definitely is.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, so we spent a lot of time now on this Cheeger inequality. So
that's what's going on. That's Cheeger's inequality.
Yeah.
We did that. We spent a lot of time on that.
Yeah.
So
okay, but that's
we'll
good.
How much more we actually get to Cheeger's inequality. Like, we have an idea of why it's true. The one side, the integer programming relaxation. The other side is more complicated. Like, you take the eigenvector and you have to you try to break it into two, and you have to show that there's some subset for which there's how should I put this? There's some subset where the Rayleigh quotient of something gives you an upper bound on some cut, and it's kind of involved, but the result is intuitive. The funny thing is, we've been talking about the spectral bisection and clustering sort of in parallel.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we sort of implicitly mentioned a bunch of things together, so I think it's good to kind of make that more explicit and cash in, I guess, right?
Okay, let's cash in a little bit.
So let's just take stock of what we've done. So we defined the Laplacian for a general graph. From the Laplacian, we found that the some spectral information, namely the lambda 2, the smallest non-negative, the smallest positive eigenvalue, is comparable in some sense to the Cheeger constant. Yep. We sort of sketched out the proof. So now I guess the next thing is to cash in on what this Cheeger constant allows you to do. Is that right? And then that allows you to do some bisectioning or
we can
clustering?
We're not really cashing in so much as we're now looking at this Laplacian, looking at this sort of algebraic connectivity, the second smallest eigenvalue, and maybe just taking an aside to see where this shows up in some settings, I would say.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I guess so now there's a reason why it's called spectral clustering, because you're going to use the spectral data to do clustering. And I guess
Yes.
we have a sense of why it should be related to clustering, because we know that lambda 2 is related to bottlenecks, and bottlenecks are implicitly related to kind of clustering, right? Clusters are things which are like sort of connected by bottlenecks, essentially. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, in some sense, when you think about like the spectral bisection algorithm, which, okay, you can think about variance, but the idea of spectral bisection is you take the second smallest eigenpair, I'll just call it lambda 2, and I forget what I was using before, maybe x2. X is the eigenvector.
Okay.
All you do is you just break your graph into two parts. I'll call it U and U complement maybe, and U is just the set of X, or the set of I rather, where Xi is at least some fixed value. And this defines a bisection. Like if you make I such that this set U has like n over 2 things, then this is a way of breaking the graph into two parts, each with n over 2 and n over 2. And we now have some intuitive idea of why this might be a good idea.
I see. So why? But so how do you choose the value of C? It seems like
Yeah. So it depends on what you want. So like if you want to make sure that both sides are exactly equal, well, then you just choose C to be like the right place where you get n over 2 on both sides.
So it's not. I'm trying to think. It's not known in advance, or how do you?
Well, okay, there's variance. Like you can choose where you make the cut. Like okay, a natural thing is like C equals 0. It's very natural. C equals 0 is very natural. But you could also make it so that okay, I'm going to have to define an ordering, I guess. So let me just define an ordering right now. I'll call this I of 1, I of 2, X of I of n, okay? You can also choose C to be X of I of 2.
Okay, I think I might see what's going on, because I think for any eigenvector, you can form this basically level set based partitioning. It's just that for the eigenvector associated to lambda 2, it leads to a particularly good partitioning.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the very natural thing to do. Like we've already talked some about using these things for drawing graphs. We've talked about Tut's spring embedding theorem. And so in some sense, suppose you want to break a graph into two parts, it's a very reasonable thing to just take this eigenvector, which in some sense, based off the drawing we've already talked about, is like trying to draw a graph in 1D and then just cutting the picture in half is really all we're doing.
I'm trying to think. In machine learning, right? A common dimensionality reduction technique is PCA.
Yeah.
Right? You basically keep the components with the largest variance. Here, it seems like it's related, but with the twist that now it's the low eigenvalues that are important rather than the large ones. But it seems like it's like a similar thing.
Yeah, you're trying to like, how should I put this? You're trying to find like the smoothest way to put your graph down somewhere. In some sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, right? Because here's another, I'm trying to make as many analogies as possible. Like if you think of like so the eigenvalues of the Laplacian on an interval will basically be the sinusoidal functions, the exponential
exactly.
functions.
Depending on the boundary conditions.
Right, exactly. In the simplest case, right? In the simplest case, with zero boundary conditions, you basically just have this half a period of the sine function, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then, when you look at higher eigenvalues, you just
they're more oscillatory. Yeah, exactly.
More, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. And I'm trying to think, what's the analogy between this and drawing a graph? It's almost like you kind of, as you said, you want to draw something with the least amount of, I don't know, maybe noise or variance or something. I'm just trying to get like a qualitative sense of why
exactly.
lowest is best. Yeah.
In this example of like you do this for where your graph is a path, It's going to be exactly this picture you drew. It's going to be this, well, the picture I drew, and then you're going to just cut right here. And it's like a very natural looking cut in some sense. Like you're actually cutting the, I mean, the idea is that these are nodal domains. Like the idea is that this cut will, okay, if C is 0, this cut is cutting our graph into its nodal domains corresponding to lambda 2. In some sense, nodal domains have a very like rich, history and like structure, when you think about like PDEs.
Sorry, can you define a nodal domain?
Yeah, so if you have some eigenvalue in like eigenfunction, the nodal domains is just like the domain minus the 0 level set.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So it's these connected components where your eigenfunction doesn't change sign. Yeah.
Right.
And those in themselves are really cool. Like, there's this really cool result of Courant about sort of like bounding the number of nodal domains corresponding to a given eigenvalue. And these exist in graph theory as well. Like there are results that say, okay, let's avoid issues of like eigenvectors equaling 0. Like if we pretend that can never happen, like you can say like for a graph, if it's, a connected graph, well, I don't need connectivity, but for a graph, you can say like, if you look at lambda k, and then you look at the eigenvector corresponding to lambda k, and you look at how many pieces the eigenvector corresponding to lambda k breaks into when you remove edges that go between a positive valuated vertex and a negatively valuated vertex, you can show it's at most k. Like it breaks into at most k pieces, which is it's a cool result, and there's lots of interesting things going on there. So there's lots of cool connections, I would say.
Awesome. Yeah, I just finally, as I was thinking in the back of my head, this now perfectly makes sense. That in this case, this 1D case, when you look at
it's exact. Yeah, it's always
because the only one difference is that lambda 1 is now positive, right? In the graph Laplacian, lambda 1 was 0. Here, lambda 1 is positive, and you don't want to do a level set here because in fact, this function is basically non-negative. So you don't want to put C equals 0, because if you take C equals 0, you have the partition is the whole set and the empty set, because the level set corresponding to greater than or equal to 0 is the entire domain for the lambda 1 function, the bump, right? The half the sine function. But for the lambda 2, right?
Yeah,
it's exactly at 0.
You're cutting right,
exactly.
You're cutting right here. Yeah,
exactly, right. Because this is the positive level set. This is this is x greater than 0, and then this is the x less than or equal to 0. So it's exactly this even cut.
And then when you do it for 3, you're going to see you get 3 and so on.
Makes perfect sense. I was just lambda 2 indeed is it's just that the only difference is that lambda 1 was either 0 or positive, but ignoring that, lambda 2 the analogy is perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great. Okay, so
but even for lambda 1, like it's perfect because there's one nodal domain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. So I think this is a pretty good intuition for why this spectral bisection works. But it's just you've defined the algorithm, and we can see it visually in this Sinusoidal example. And I guess clustering is probably very complementary to this, right? Because as soon as you bisect in a proportionate way, then that gives you your clusters. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, I want to say. Right?
Yeah, it's very similar, and you don't even have to do the cut. The idea is that taking your graph and representing it this way helps you understand like the overall structure. Like there's this famous picture, like suppose you have a graph like, let me think of a good example. Suppose you have some like funny looking graph like this or something. It's an S. If you just use pairwise if you just treat this data as it is right now, you can run into issues via some techniques, because like the relationship here, it's really like Euclidean distance doesn't really tell you the whole story here. But if what you do is you take this data, you build a graph out of it, like you say, I'm going to connect two data points with an edge if they're within some distance of each other. So you're now connecting edges all along here. And then you do this diffusion mapping. You draw this graph using low energy eigenvectors of the graph Laplacian. Well, like functionally what it's going to look like is it's actually just going to look like a line.
Okay.
So you take this data here, which like is not a straight line. You build a graph out of it, and then you compute the smallest.
I see. But it makes sense because the graph connectivity doesn't tell you how it has no metric information. It doesn't tell you whether it's twisty or not. It has the same connectivity.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, whether
exactly.
it's twisty or not, like the graph.
Yeah, exactly. I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So that's the idea of like this spectral partitioning.
Sorry. So what's the idea?
Or spectral clustering, rather, I should say.
So what does spectral clustering do in this case?
So spectral clustering, what does it do? So there's like variants of this, but I think traditionally the idea is you have some data, or maybe you start with a graph. But if you have data, you build a graph out of that data. Then what you do is you compute some number of small eigenvector pairs of your Laplacian. Maybe you compute log n of them, maybe you compute 30 of them, I don't know. Then what you do is you take your graph and now you embed it in r to the 30 or r to the log n, however many eigenvectors you computed. And the idea is now Euclidean distance means something.
Okay. And then
so now maybe you just use them to partition, but now you can just use k-means or something, or whatever you want. Whereas like if you wanted to use k-means on like maybe this thing to break it into two, well, okay, that's not the worst example in the world, but it might not be the best idea.
I see. Okay, sorry, I missed that. Okay, so the logic is, okay, so you have a graph, then you have embed using
low dimensional embedding.
Right. Using low eigenvalues. So low dim embedding, and then cluster in Euclidean space using whatever algorithm.
And the other thing to keep in mind is your original data could be very high dimensional. And if it's high dimensional data that's functionally like on a low dimensional manifold, you're like saving tons of computation as well.
Right.
Yeah. So
awesome. This is great. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the rough idea. Okay. Yeah. And it's all really
beautiful
cool stuff. Like
very beautiful.
Yeah.
I might want to try some of this stuff out on my own. I didn't know about these techniques. This is great.
Yeah. So like I think the go-to paper for this sort of stuff is I think it's Jordan.
I see. I wonder if there's there must be a library, a Python library for doing the spectral clustering.
There must be.
Yeah.
I feel like there should be.
Okay.
That's
awesome. We did say we were going to cover Markov chains, so let's do that. How should we describe it?
However you want. Whatever. What do you
I'm trying to think. So I think. How do I say? Actually, let's not go into the whole setup because I think the example of PageRank captures the essence without needing to maybe formalize it.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So let's so this will be kind of a mix of fun application and illuminating some nice graph theory or just mathematics in general. So let's quickly talk about the PageRank algorithm, right? So now we have a graph. What are the graph? What are the vertices of the graph? So we have a graph. Vertices are web pages, and edges are now going to be directed. In other words, they have arrows. So you're going to have a graph. So you're going to have an edge, from I to j, if I links j, right? It has a URL that takes you to j. Okay. So this could be a graph here. So let me just call this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if web page 1 links to 2 and 3, you'd have 2 edges there, and then 2 might link to 3, 1 might link to 5, 5 might link to 3 and 4, 4 might link back to 5, and 4 links to 3. Something like that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Great. And what we want to form is what's called a Markov chain from this graph. We're going to have a matrix.
Yeah, we're functionally going to build a random walk on this graph.
Yeah. So
the idea is we're going to be at some vertex, and then we're going to sort of randomly choose, like with uniform probability, any of the sort of like outgoing edges.
Yeah,
any
exactly.
Of the
yeah. So the intuition is that suppose you're on a web page and you click randomly on one of the links there. Where do you go? So exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So if you're at web page I, so you're at column I, then basically you're going to put, and if I is connected to, it links n web pages, then you're going to put a 1 over n everywhere in the column over I where there's one of these j i's, right? So you can have a 1 over n and a 1 over n. I think
you want row, right?
Sorry, maybe if we're going from, I guess it depends on how you multiply your matrices, but I think of I to j as going from column I to row j. The columns are summed to 1.
Okay, maybe I have it wrong. You keep going.
Okay, right? Because if, like, for example, if I multiply by the column vector, which is 1 at location I, then I'm going to get, as my resulting output vector, 1 over n at each of the vertices where I'm linked. So that's the resulting probability distribution.
Yeah, but I think, okay, sure, this is fine.
Right? Okay, yeah, okay. So anyways, so you have this matrix, I guess I'll just call it A, where, as I said, basically you're writing down the adjacency matrix, now taking into account.
Yeah, so it's like A times D inverse. So like divide by the diagonal.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. Yeah. There is a slight bit of a problem that you have to fix, which is that suppose you have a web page 6 here, which doesn't link to anything. What do? What you do is you just artificially say, if the web page doesn't link to anything, then the user will just click on any random web page uniformly in the world. So you just put you act as though it were actually linking all other web pages. So basically it's a 1 over capital N. So if this were a 6, you'd have a 1 over capital N everywhere, where capital N is the number of web pages in this universe of web pages. Okay. Yeah, this is a way to make sure that
that your Markov chain is like irreducible.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess no, it doesn't.
It doesn't necessarily. Well, how I say?
No, it doesn't imply that. But yeah, I understand why you're doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, so A is the matrix that is this kind of modified version coming from the connectivity. So you have weighted entries for each link or directed edge, and then if you have an edge which is or a vertex which is disconnected, you're going to artificially insert edges to everything, essentially. Not because there's actually URLs linking, but because the user is free to click any other web page in the world if there's no links there, right, at random.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And actually, one last step. Okay. So where are we going? We're going to basically...
We want to find a stationary distribution is the idea.
That's right.
We have some random walk, and we want to figure out eventually, if we do this long enough, on average, how much time do we spend on each website?
That's right. So basically, you have the result is the following. You have a matrix that tells you your probability of transitioning to other states. That's what it means to be a Markov matrix, right? And the idea is that if you kept clicking on all the pages according to this transition rule, right, which is you follow the links on a web page or randomly, then the stationary distribution is basically the average at which you'd visit each website, right? So, right, and that tells you basically how important a web page is, because a web page that is more frequently visited in this stationary distribution should be a more highly ranked web page, right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. And let me do it the other way, because you're using left stochastic matrices.
Yeah, so let me write it like this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this will basically be the P. I was looking at the algorithm. I just studied. I'm not an expert in this, but there's one more modification you want. So if this is A, what is P? Actually, P, there's a parameter you want to tune alpha. They call it the dampening factor. We'll see why in a second. But P will be basically 1 minus alpha A plus alpha times...
a lazy walk, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Plus alpha I, right? Alpha I?
Alpha is just a constant. So it's just the matrix with all capital, all 1 over n's essentially. Basically, it's the uniform. It's
Oh,
the
alpha j. Oh, never mind. It's not a lazy random walk. Never mind.
It's basically the completely mixing walk where I can I actually completely random walk in the sense that I can teleport anywhere with equal probability. Yeah, it's like the teleporter walk, I suppose. I don't know what you want to call it. Yeah. So this is just a way of how do I say? Here's how you can think of it. With probability alpha, I don't pay attention to the links on the webpage. I'm just clicking anywhere on the internet, and then with probability 1 minus alpha, I'm following the links, right? Yeah, essentially. If you think of A as a link matrix, I mean, A did get modified for the web pages that didn't have links, but up to that, you're basically either following the link rule or you're just doing something random, which is reasonable as well. Okay. So anyways, so this P is now the stochastic matrix because the way it's designed, the sum of every column sums to 1, right? And part of this Perron-Frobenius theorem, there's quite a few hypotheses, but we don't have time to go over that. But the point is that when you're in this situation where you have this stochastic matrix like this, then eliminating some degeneracy assumptions, but that's been kind of handled by these
yeah, as long as you assume that it's irreducible and aperiodic,
right?
What he's about to say holds.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, you want to just avoid non-degenerate situations where you have a graph where basically things don't talk to each other. Like if you had a graph like this, then clearly, you can have a stationary distribution that only looks at these guys or only looks at those guys and they don't mix, right? So you want to basically avoid situations like that. And we've
also you want to avoid stuff like this because here, like depending on where you start, like you still have some sort of dependence of where you're going to be at a given time. Because if you start here, let's say, then at every odd time step, you're going to be on the right side. Every even time step, you're going to be on the left side. So you also want to avoid issues like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyways, this
so
matrix,
that you have uniqueness in some sense.
Right. Actually, I was looking at the theorem, but this is actually kind of a little bit surprising. But I think as long as the matrix has strictly positive entries, you're okay. And that's what we've designed our situation.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So in our case, P does have strictly positive entries, right? So the Perron-Frobenius theorem says
which is
that
called being a P matrix.
Okay.
Yeah, then you get the strongest version there, but most of the time when you use it in practice, you don't ever like really have a P matrix. Usually there's some like sparsity.
Yeah, indeed. You need additional stuff. So that's why you have this alpha slightly greater than 0, and that just makes everything much cleaner. Right? It's also reasonable too. But yeah, so the Perron-Frobenius theorem, so basically when you have this kind of stochastic matrix, and let's say all entries are positive entries, then you're going to get a unique eigenvector with eigenvalue equal to 1. Okay, kind of ran out of space there.
Yeah, and in fact, it's the largest
that's right.
modulus, and it's uniquely the largest.
Right, that's right. Unique eigenvector, eigenvalue 1, and it's the largest. Right, and that's what gives you the stationary distribution, because that's precisely what it means to be eigenvalue 1, right? There's a 1 right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, so I know this was quite rushed, and I'll put links accordingly. But I thought this was just cool because here's an application of graph theory, probably the most lucrative application of graph theory by a large margin, I must imagine, because there aren't that many companies more valuable than Google. Maybe Apple might be the only other contender. I don't know if they have any graph theory algorithms. But yeah, this has to be a candidate for the most lucrative math algorithm ever. And it's basically based on relatively, straightforward graph theory. I guess the Perron-Frobenius theorem is probably a bit involved. I've actually never looked at the proof, but it's probably a bit
It's not too involved. It's not too bad.
Okay. Yeah.
You need more. Like if you have a P matrix, it's not too bad.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a nice application of graph theory. I guess it's not really. I'm trying to think.
By the way, I can just like say in words really quickly. Like imagine you have a P matrix. Every entry is like positive. Just take some like vector that's like not all positive. Like one way to show this is, okay, you start off, you have some positive eigenvector that you can show pretty easily, and then take something that's like not positive And then all you do is like look at the Rayleigh quotient,
Mm.
and you'll just notice that if you made everything positive, life would just be so much better. Like you would increase the energy.
Mm. So then what does that, sorry, what does that do for you then?
So that shows that the positive sort of one has to be the maximal. Like suppose that the maximizing wasn't all positive.
Oh,
just take that vector and make all the entries positive, and you're going to increase energy.
Got it. Yeah. That makes sense.
Because when you look at the Rayleigh quotient of this, you're just like, all you're doing is adding up products of entries.
That's right.
So just making them all the same sign always like increases.
That makes sense.
So that's an intuitive way to think about it.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So anyways, I guess this was maybe a slight detour from what we talked about, but it is spectral in the sense that, the eigenvalue 1 is what makes the whole thing work.
And also eigenvalue gaps like tell you something about this, because, the stationary distribution, like this is what actually happens in practice when you apply this, many, many times. And so if you want to look at, let's say, I'll write it here really small. If you want to look at like p to the k times some initial distribution u, and, maybe you can write in terms of its eigen decomposition, I'm assuming that this p is normal. So I have a orthonormal eigenvector decomposition. So like, hold on. Suppose I write this as some linear combination of eigenvectors xi, where I have like lambda I xi. And these are normal. Then what I do after k iterations, all I have is just like alpha I lambda I to the k of xi. And so lambda 1 is equal to 1. So that one just stays the same, but all the others are less than 1. And so when you take powers of things less than 1, they're getting smaller and smaller.
Right, exactly.
And so this is sort of showing, and the gap between lambda 1 and all the other eigenvalues is sort of showing you some bound on how quickly you can expect to converge to your stationary distribution. So there's some spectral stuff there.
Exactly, right. Because basically the larger the gap, the more quickly you can distinguish between the two, right? Because one's getting much bigger in proportion to the second largest eigenvalue precisely by the ratio, right? And
things with large gaps, these are, to relate this to the Laplacian, gaps between lambda 1 and lambda 2 here, if our graph is every vertex has the same degree, this is exactly the lambda 1 and lambda 2 from the Laplacian. This lambda 2 we were dealing with, this is exactly the same lambda 2 up to some shift. And so the idea is, remember before, this large lambda 2 corresponded to high connectivity, lack of bottlenecks. The large lambda 2, this is what we'll call like for the Laplacian, this is what we'll call an expander. There's no bottlenecks. And here we see the same thing. So that would correspond to a large gap between lambda 1 and lambda 2 here, which means that you get rapid mixing.
Nice. Yep.
Because there's no bottleneck.
Lots of flow.
Because if you had a bottleneck, you cannot mix quickly.
That's right.
Like imagine you have that bottleneck picture, you're on one side. You're probably going to stay in that side for a very long time, because the chance you're going to make it all the way out through that very narrow bottleneck is quite rare.
That's right. Yeah, makes sense. Great. Awesome. Okay, so in our basically amount of time remaining, why don't we wrap this up by what's the state of the field? What excites you? What are you working on?
Yeah, state of the field. So spectral graph theory can do some really powerful things, and we've talked about it some. I would say like very recent things that have been pretty cool. This proof of the sensitivity conjecture in theoretical computer science.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Use spectral graph theory.
Oh, okay.
Although like I don't really know the details of it because I'm not too up to speed on it. There was a recent result about a conjecture about equiangular lines. So like you're in like some dimension n, and you have some fixed angle, and you want to know how many lines through the origin can you make so that each pair of lines has that exact angle. And so there was a conjecture of that, which was like resolved almost like fully tightly by one of my buddies, John Tidor at MIT, and also Yufei Zhao at MIT, and then also two undergrads whose names are leaving me, but it's an amazing paper. It's an Analyst paper that just came out fairly recently. And the main workhorse of their result is a spectral graph theory result about the multiplicity of the second eigenvalue for bounded degree graphs. And so there's a lot of really amazing results which have come out recently with spectral graph theory. I had a recent sort of like breakthrough. I had a paper out in September that solved this conjecture about the maximum gap between the largest and smallest eigenvalue, adjacency eigenvalues of a matrix over like all graphs of a given order. And that was a conjecture from 2001, which I was really happy about that paper. And these days, I just spend a lot of time thinking a lot about extremal problems in spectral graph theory, also thinking a lot about things related to nodal domains. This is something which I used to work on a good amount. And in general, spectral graph theory is just, it's a very interesting field, and there's lots of cool things to do. Although these days I would say I very much focus more on like structural questions in spectral graph theory, extremal questions in spectral graph theory, less so like algorithms. But yeah, no, it's a really fascinating field.
It's funny because how do I say? I make this kind of joke / stereotype that there's like kind of like two kinds of mathematicians. There's like the mathematicians who like discrete stuff, and they like chess, they like puzzles, and they wear tie-dye shirts and juggle. And then there's the mathematicians that like continuous things. They like topology, equations, and physics. And I definitely fall in the latter category. But I feel like having studied this subject more, there's actually a beautiful intersection of both the discrete and the continuous. And I feel like in a different lifetime, like in another life, I could, maybe I could have studied this stuff too. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's really cool stuff. It's like really, it's very beautiful, very like, just really amazing things. Like, I could just talk about this stuff. There's just so much. I mean, there's just so much. Like even going back to like the electrical networks we didn't even talk about, this is connected to this really cool problem of like squaring a square. So I don't know if you ever heard this. Like you take there was some open problem, I'm going to butcher this, like in the 1920s and 1930s, about like the existence of squares being tiled by other squares, all of different like integer lengths. And in fact, you can like relate that question to the question to like electrical networks in spectral graph theory, which is really cool. There's some cool, like you can just, this is in a lot of graph theory books. And there's a nice paper from like 1940, I think, by like Tutt when he was an undergrad at Cambridge and some other people about this.
Wow.
So
Okay.
It's just,
cool.
There's just so much interesting stuff. Yeah.
Wow. By the way, just curious, do you agree with my division into two types of mathematicians, or that too coarse? I'm just kidding.
No. There's a spectrum, but that this is not. I know people that fully lie in each of those camps. So
okay, because I feel like I'm looking at you like you're neither, but you're at the intersection. So I guess that's why you fall through the cracks. Okay. Okay. Well, great, John. This was so much fun, and I learned a lot. And thank you so much for your time. And I'm hoping this will actually enable the public who appreciate you for maybe the other non-mathematical aspects of you to now actually see what it's like to be a research mathematician.
Yeah. No, it's been fun. This was good to do.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for your time, John. And look forward to seeing more beautiful mathematics come out of your work.
All right. Sounds good. All right. You have a good one.
Great. Thank you.